Only someone who's an absolute maniac or maybe just has a few screws loose is going to take on a thick walnut slab rocking the original power saw. So how'd I get here? Let's rewind. I'm making a desk for someone. These slabs were from a tree that had to come down next to his house. And if you're new here or haven't been following along lately, I've moved, parked all my power tools, set up temporary shop here in the corner of the garage, and the challenge has been to set up shop using only the basic tools you see behind me on the wall. I started by building these sawhorses with the cross rails. This was my solution to make a work surface that solves the whole how do you build a workbench without already having a bench conundrum. Anybody can do this. I used those to build this bench. The bench was dead simple with some cool tricks along the way, like how to use those sawhorse cross rails to make a makeshift vise. The whole concept of this bench was one that anybody can make, not having to do any real precision cutting, no stock prep, basically just screwing this thing together with some bolts and ending up with a bench that probably won't win any beauty contests, but it's totally functional with a rock solid vise, super easy to install, complete all the way with a series of dog holes for work holding and a tung oil finish and all the final details. And now I need to make a desk. A thick walnut hardwood slab desk doesn't exactly lend itself to hand tools, but with the small shop basic hand tool challenge that I've given myself, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. These 3 slabs need to go in the garage, and I can't open the garage door all the way thanks to that tall power rack. I could rearrange, but we all know that's not gonna happen. Too lazy. So I start trying to muscle these things in, and even though they've been cut for a long time and they're air dried out, they're still pretty heavy. Ow! That was on purpose. Yeah, it strengthens the old brain box. So I get this slab in and already start to take inventory, deciding how this desk is going to take shape and come together. Slab 2 on the way in, and I'm a little more careful this time, but I'm sure that won't be the last time I bang my head on something. I hoist these things up, already getting a workout, and I set the 3 of them up against my bench. When you look at them, there's a definite curve going on, and although they seem big, imagine 2 vertical lines on each of those slabs. If I ripped a straight line down each edge, there would only be a couple of inches of width left. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard about there being metal and wild wood, but it turns out that's true. I gave these tree trunks a good once over to check for any obvious things and found a couple of chunks of metal. I don't know what in the world this is, maybe from an old fence or I don't know what, but there it is. Clear that stuff out and hopefully no more surprises as I get the hand tools going on this, but I'm going to have to use those curves to my advantage with the design of how this desk is going to go together. A good desk gives you a hug, so I'm putting the concave section on the outside edges and the rounded or convex edge I'm going to rip down a straight line. And I only want this desk to be 65 inches for the space it's going in, which is great because I'll be able to cross cut off about 5 inches or so from each edge. Those edges have a lot of checks, which are basically just cracks from the drawing process, and they'll get cut off anyway. All this bark will have to go at some point, but I'm flipping these back and forth, so I just figured I'd leave the bark on for now to act as a little bit of a cushion as I keep flipping this thing over and over. I mark the cut on the sapwood side first, just using a 2x6 for a straight edge and a black ink pen, just like the cowboys used to. And when I flip it over, and by the by, that looked easy enough, and it was, but I'll admit it, by the end of this video, I didn't want to flip that over anymore. Anyway, I carried the line up the other side, and I used the same straight edge right up to that spot to mark all the way across the board on the other side so that my rip line is marked on both sides of the slab. Because I'm cutting this with a handsaw, if I didn't flip it now and then to saw from both sides, the saw would go off the line on the far side of the cut. I'm going to flip this over again so that I can start cutting with the line closer to me. Float the saw. That's the best way to start a smooth cut. Start sawing as if the saw teeth are floating a millimeter above where the actual wood is. That way it doesn't grab and jam and all that stuff that makes anyone brand new to handsawing think that it's actually impossible to do. As I got started here, I thought, you know what, it might be interesting to see just how long this takes for an average guy to use a very average saw against this walnut slab. So I got the timer going as I worked through this guy. To start right on the line from both sides, I flip early here. After this first flip, you can see what I'm talking about. Cutting on the far side is just a little bit more awkward than cutting on the side closer to me, but it's no big deal, and I'm really just trying to get a good start before I go rip-roaring through this thing. And after this flip is when I begin to engage the power saw, getting an extra hand on that saw to just put a little extra pepper into each saw stroke. The strategy here is to saw it at an angle which makes a track and gives the saw a course to follow on the underside. I flip it and power saw it, shifting around now and then to avoid sawing into the sawhorses. Then you can see again a distinct change as I lower the angle to make a new track which will guide the saw after the next flip. And so how do you know when to flip it? Well, look here, if I saw past the track that I made before, which you can tell I did because I'm starting to get those little curls of exit cut, and you can see exactly where it begins to trail off the line a little bit. This is the thing about using a handsaw. If you're cutting on the waist side and steering the saw, keeping it close to the line, that makes the tip of the saw drift away from the line. If you keep going like that and pull it straight out, that's when you get that trademark womp 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 thing happening where the tip of the saw whips side to side when you draw back from each cut. This is the area where I came off the line, so to keep it from getting carried away, it's an easy fix after the flip. I turn off the power saw for a sec and just give it a little bit of tender loving kindness. Just like that. And we're back in business. Abraham Lincoln said that if he had an hour to chop down a tree, he'd spend the first 45 minutes sharpening his axe. A sharp saw here is important too, but the routine maintenance during the task is to wax. The same block of paraffin wax that I use on the bottom of my hand planes, I rub around on the saw once in a while to make it glide like it's sawing through butter instead of slogging through a 2+ inch thick slab of walnut. Despite having that saw as waxed up as a grocery store cucumber, it's about here that I run into the first bit of difficulty. You can notice here how I'm having to fight the wood a little bit more. The saw just seems like it's heavy. Look on this side and you can see a big knot. Knots not only make the wood around them harder, but they make the wood grain a little bit crazy and more difficult to work. So I basically try to just keep my patience, flip it more regularly, and try to keep things under control so that I can get past this area. If the wood grain makes the kerf really close up and bind my saw, making it impossible to move, you can always use a wedge to spread open the kerf. But it's starting to lighten up. And finally here, we are cooking with Crisco again. There is finally a light at the end of this wooden tunnel. This is the sapwood side of the board. The sapwood is that milkier light color which will be the underside of the desk. The nice dark heartwood is going to be the top of the desk. And you can see how I tried to maximize the width by putting the cut line as close to the bark as I possibly could here on the sapwood side of this slab. And here I'm giving it a nice long track because I'm sick and tired of the flips. Finally, as I straddle bike tires, this one is done. Wax that saw, baby. This is like man versus nature. Maybe I should mount this thing up on the wall above the fireplace or something. Inspection here on the cut, and you know which side I was cutting on based on how close to the line I was. Another example here as to why the saw will sometimes drift away from the line on the underside when steering close to the line on the top side. Here's that nasty knot that threw me for a loop. Total time here was around 28 minutes, probably longer than some people expected and maybe a lot shorter than others would have thought. The takeaway though is that even if you only have half an hour to get into the workshop, you can get a lot done. I mean, heck, just imagine not doing something so terribly inefficient with your time such as sawing this whole thing with a handsaw. But anyways, I figured without all the camera moving around and goofing off, I could have probably easily gotten that done in under 20 minutes. So here's the next day or a couple of days later or something, and I figured let's go again. I won't make you sit through the slow process again, but I start the timer and I'm going to show you the full process, super speed zipping through this thing, which was actually not off to a great start because the saw was binding in the cut right at the beginning and I had not yet cut deep enough in to fit a wedge, so this was tough. A lot of back and forth and it was slow going to start for sure. Once I had gotten in deep enough where I could fit a wedge right at the end of the slab to spread the kerf, it started opening up on its own and I just didn't need it anymore. On the horses, I would push the slab forward, cut it a good ways down, then once I was able to, I'd slide everything around and cut right in between the sawhorses. Since I wanted to get a true sense of how long this takes, I parked the camera right there on the tripod, crossing my fingers the batteries wouldn't go out or overheat. So there's no angle changes at all, none of that kind of stuff. And you know, there's just nothing like a little bit of exercise to lubricate the joints. I know some people probably think this is a huge waste of time, and I just hope they never find out about golf. Personally, I do prefer power tools for this kind of thing and stock prep in general, but there's other options out there too. Where I think hand tools really shine the most is for joinery and the finer details kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, with a good set of hand tools, there's just not much that's really out of reach, which is just awesome. So there we have it, boys. Was able to shave about 10 minutes off the total time. And when you feel like you just don't have time to do any woodworking, getting 15 to 20 minutes in there, even when armed with only a handsaw, and you can get something done. Now to actually turn this into a desktop, it's going to go a little something like this, flaring out on both ends, and just need to make sure that I have enough width, especially in the center. Otherwise, I'm going to have to cut that other slab down and put it right in between these two. You know, even if you don't have exactly the ideal tool for every little thing you're trying to do, hey, I just went through these thick walnut slabs with a handsaw, and although I'm not in a hurry to do it again, it was kind of fun. This isn't even like a mega rip saw. It's a pretty basic panel saw, which means it's not even as long as they are. The longer the saw, the faster it's going to cut because there's just more teeth that are going to go through with each push. This one's 22 inches long. You can get these saws that are 26, even 28 inches long, I think. This one's like 5.5 points per inch. So it's a good basic bench saw. Not exactly a saw that I'd want to be sawing slabs with all day long, but really I wouldn't want to be sawing slabs with a handsaw all day long anyway. Thanks guys, and I'm gonna go ice my shoulder.